The title of our fireside chat is Regulation versus Innovation to Mutual Exclusive, ? And we were meeting actually last night and were thinking about how to introduce people or not to introduce people. And Galith said, well, probably it's not good if we only go by titles and names and roles, but still, in order to give you a little impression, I will say a couple of words on the both of you. Galith has been in tech for quite a while, and she has been in leadership for quite a while. She's also part of the Jewish community, and she's bringing all her roles and experiences to the table. And Philipp also does quite a number of things, mostly in the law field. He's writing a PhD on these questions also, and he is in the legal tech lab, who is also thinking about interdisciplinary approaches to questions of tech and regulations. Well, so I give over to you, and I'm looking forward to your fireside chat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Exactly, as you've heard, I graduated from law school last year, and as you can imagine now, I am taking the regulator's perspective today. And as you can further determine, I am of the opinion that regulation does not necessarily impede innovation. Rather, it can be beneficial, both can be beneficial to each other if done right, and I hope we can further explore how exactly this could look like in the future. What I first wanted to do is define regulation for you, so we know what we're talking about, all of us in the room. And referring to innovation, regulation, it means the influencing of the behavior of consumers or companies, in most cases by market-specific legislative measures to inhibit unwanted behaviors. And I believe that such actions need to be taken into, or in the context of AI, but let's further explore this then. Galith, you told me that there is a great way you prepare for public speaking, having to do with AI. Why don't you share that and quickly give us your opinion or your standpoint on today's topic,
Yes.
so that we can start nicely.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can all hear me nice and loud all the way to the end. You cannot. May someone please increase my volume? That's the first time I have to ask for that. Yes, I have to put my mouth on it. All right. Yes. Great. Thanks, first of all, for the introduction. Yes, it was important for me that you hear that today I do not represent my company. The opinions that you will hear today are entirely my own. The reason I need to say that is we are actually supposed to be a very neutral entity in the industry. Hence, I'm taking a stance away from that to give my personal perspective as a technologist, as a business executive, as an ethnic minority, as a woman, and as a leader under the age of 40. So now you can guess how old I am. What I wanted to say is, yes, actually I've also had the opportunity to build technology and to use it for the benefit of public speaking. So one thing I want to tell you is, if I was to be the manipulative person that I can be, there is a technology that is capable of looking into your LinkedIn profile and tell me exactly what you want to hear, so you will love everything I have to say. I can actually profile you with absolutely no additional thing than your own published information online, and then gear my message to manipulate you. So I can use technology for good, or I can use it for evil. This is AI-based, and it's very important that you understand that this is only one of the many examples on how technology is pervasive to our lives. And I thought the previous talk was exceptionally good, because it really hits on three parts that I think are vital for us as ethic leaders, as regulators, and as humans who are potentially victims or perpetrators of the technology we're building, on our position as individuals. So, to the violent agreement we're going to have today, I can already say that. We will not disagree that legislation is important. We will not disagree on that. What we might have a conversation around is its place and its space into our behaviors, into the reasoning in why we do the things that we do, and our belief, as it was again very beautifully explained a minute ago, in our position in society, not our society, the global society, to be the example maker, to actually be the trendsetter when it comes to good technology, good behaviors in ethics and business. So I'll start from there. I think what's important for us to reflect on is, are you yourselves aware of how pervasive those AI logics, algorithms, and data are in your life? Do you feel confident you understand it well enough? That's a powerful statement. How did you know to take that drive or that road? Or how did you know that the loan that was accepted or not accepted was based on which principle? How did you know why this restaurant was recommended to you and not another one? How do you know that a certain healthcare agreement is negotiated for you or against you? All of these are AI logics, and they can be regulated, but it doesn't mean that we cannot control the systems that put them into place. So my primary statement is, the human beings that are building the algorithms and the data sets that are being utilized are fundamentally biased, and regulation cannot yet solve it. How do you feel?
I think that's partially true. First of all, I will admit to you, obviously, that human beings are biased in their everyday actions, and that these biases, Professor Ketterman greatly mentioned that as well, can play into how the systems they develop themselves are then biased in their working. So oftentimes people have the idea that the systems that are used to judge them, for example, their application if they apply for a job, are bias-free, are perfectly fine and working, because why would they use it if it weren't? So they don't understand. First of all, they don't probably understand how the system came to be, how it was trained by data sets that can be biased in and of themselves. So we have the problem and the responsibility to control the data sets that are used when developing AI. What I would disagree with you is that I am of the opinion that it can be regulated to have specific requirements focusing on your data sets that you use, in order to at least ensure they are as unbiased as they can possibly be. So a key point for the regulation of AI and the debate around it is what ethical standards need to be implemented into AI. And one of them is diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. For example, the high-level expert group, its actual name, the high-level expert group on AI, refer to trustworthy guidelines for AI development and usage. And this diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness were certain key factors they identified as important. And these guidelines were then used by the European Commission to put into place the Artificial Intelligence Act that is still being discussed. And one of its factors in how do you implement these values, especially regarding data sets, is data governance. So it states that data sets need to be unbiased and free of opinion and so. And I know that there are technical limitations to how much you can actually control these biases, but the intent is there, and that is exactly the point why we should have this interdisciplinary approach, so that you can tell me how can we use these, or how can we actually use technology to get to these goals that we have, and unbiased AI clearly being one of them. How is that possible? So is there a way, do you think? Because
I know there is, but okay. I think I want to still give one more consideration. GDPR has been a pain in every business beep since it started. Not because no business nor people think data compliance and data privacy doesn't matter. No one thinks that data and your own ownership of it is not an important thing. However, the legislation behind it has created a lot of hindrance to actually building opportunities, innovation, user experience improvements to the way we touch point with our technology. Think about it. How many clicks do you now have to do when you want to read a recipe online? At least 6 more than you had before. Does it mean we should not have regulated the data privacy? Absolutely not. Could it have been done in a mindset of user experience, transparency, setting up the data from the human point of view, and understanding the underlying reasoning for this, to continue to be competitive in our approach to technology? So one discussion we've had, by the way, we've had this fire chat 16 times before today, and we never ever get to the point where we get to a conclusion, and I think this will not be the day either. But that's the point, right? We don't conclude today, we start the conversation. One thing we discussed a lot, and I think we both agree, is that innovation at the service of humanity and our planet is what we're trying to accomplish, from our point of view. Technology is here at the service of augmentation of our capability. So not to replace, not to undo, not to break the position of our human society into the world, but to augment it, to improve it. We, and it was again a fantastic point made on the Europe in the context of Russia, China, United States and other countries, we have taken a posture of being good role models, good practitioners, good world citizens, and position ourselves in that ethical mindset of a better impact, technology for all. We have inherent biases, just like everyone on this planet, which we want to be aware of and create committees to offset. But let's understand ourselves in the context of that world. If you are all familiar with the technology CRISPR, which is a DNA re-agencing capability, which is mind-blowing, right? The ability to re-engineer DNA to change fundamental component of a human being. It can be about curing a genetic disease or fixing my eyes to the real color they should have always been, which is green, right? The power we have as a human community to influence is actually regulated in very different manner across the world. I don't know it for a fact, but I'm ready to bet there are a few CRISPR-engineered humans already on this planet. They're not European. Why is this important? Not to say that we should go to those boundaries, but to understand that in the race where we think we are in a position to actually be a good role model, to actually influence positively the world, the race is not even. And by race I mean the running part, the speed of it. People are starting from a different point of view with different boundaries, different limitations. Regulation can have that impact that we need to be aware of to impede speed, competitiveness, and ability to create technology to the benefit of humans. So going back to AI. AI in its regulation is not a discussion. The question is, what could we create as a set of principles, a little bit in the story of the 10 Commandments, at a time where people could kill and steal and lie and consequences for this were minor, we tried to shift our society to be more advanced by putting pressures and boundaries and friction to them, to force them to move in a direction that was not natural, that was not regulated. So those 10 commandments in those times, if we want to believe these existed, forced us to advance our awareness as human in our impact to each other. What would those look in the concept of regulation to still be directive, but not limitative?
Let me refer to a couple of points you've made that I think are interesting. First of all, I agree with you that the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Act, may have not have the best impact it could have, and is, for example, an example of not perfect regulation, to say the least. But still, the Brussels effect that Professor Ketterman already mentioned, it inspired data protection laws in 120 countries around the world. So Europe's position as a role model for regulation is there. It's the so-called Brussels effect, and I think that Europe could reach the same standing as a role model in regards to AI by smartly, this time, regulating AI usage. And you mentioned it's completely true. Regulation can impede the speed of the competitiveness of Europe as a competitor for AI regulation in the world, AI innovation in the world. And how do we fix it? Or how can Europe stay competitive while also being regulated is basically what we are wanting to discuss here. And I am a fan of the ideas that the high-level expert group actually proposed. A quick side note, there was a study done by Jobin et al. In 2019 that analyzed all available worldwide ethical standards regarding AI, and it found that they were rapidly converging on 5 simple principles. These are non-maleficence, so AI should be developed to not do harm, responsibility or accountability, so that it plays into the next point, transparency and explainability. You have to understand the system to then hold it accountable if it doesn't function properly. Justice and fairness and the respect for various human rights such as privacy and security are the next ones. And I think the high-level expert group expanded on these a bit, but not noticeably. And what they can represent is if we implement them accordingly and we regulate AI so smartly that people want to use these systems because they trust them, they are explainable, they are easily modifiable, for example, because we can understand them and because we can understand why there's a problem with the certain system. If we can influence innovation to be for the humans, for the users, so incredibly interesting and well received that they want to use Europe-developed AI, such as the Made in Germany stamp that was implemented. If we could achieve that in the AI context, then we would win the competition for worldwide, for being the best place to innovate and to develop AI. And I think we have to now talk about how can we accomplish these goals by technical innovation, by technical implementation, and how can we implement then regulation that prescribes to set these goals for your systems, and then we have to achieve them. And I think that is the interesting point. I don't know, do you have them in mind? Shall I repeat them again? Is there anything that you would say is technically pretty hard to achieve? I mean, the explainability one is a big one, I believe.
I think what I love about those, and we can share also the links to those 6 dimensions actually, is that they can be regulated as underlying principles, but they first start from the individual ethical grounding. What does it mean? Human agency and oversight. It means that we understand that we cannot automate technology, or AI cannot take control over what we're talking is augmentation concept. That's very important. Even though we know humans are biased, it allows for the checks and balance. What I think is interesting in this conversation between innovation and legislation is that at the middle of it all is ethics. And the point of ethics is actually that it's a deeply individual decision to do or not do, regardless of what legislation demands. It's that choice. If you think of legality, what legislation is, we know there is rules of law that were deeply illegal today. Not having women being able to vote, not having the representation of certain ethnic minority, that was a law. This was written by legislators. Was it ethical? Was it representative? Did it actually push us in a direction that brings us further as a society? No. The benefit of this conversation is that legislation needs to have that, I think it was called this oversight committee. I would love to imagine a world in which legislators first understand the content.
I would too.
Second of all, have the check and balance with that society, that committee. And imagine a place in that committee where, yes, we bring representation because diversity matters. We all violently agree on this. But imagine that a part of that diversity, children are represented. Not just ethnic minorities, but different ability level are represented. Age range are represented. Imagine something even more incredible. What if there is a representation called devil's advocate who is going to prove to you how they can weaponize what you're building at all time to make you aware of the potential unforeseen consequence of your technology? Why is it important? Because we're goddamn privileged as a society. We believe in like equal right and diversity and equal representation. That is our privilege in our society. The reality is around us, it is vastly different. Regulation that only looks at our biases and regulates around that will miss an important component, which is that what we create can be utilized for other intended purposes that cannot be regulated because people will do it despite of regulation and legislation. It can be ethically understood, and the risk-taking can be measured. So I think what we're trying to do here is give space to legislation to encompass our mission, which is to make humanity a less disastrous species on this planet, to allow for better impact, but not at all costs. We had a discussion with someone at lunch where we said, what makes humans superior to the planet? When we talk about ethics, we only talk about our ethics, our benefit, our wins. When you have those 5 dimensions, one of the key elements is societal and environmental well-being. Who speaks for the planet in these ethics committees? How do legislators take into account the impact? That is why you need to balance the regulation, which is important, and push the boundaries of our societal impact, but also the individual responsibility. The individual responsibility, that's the question. How do we awaken every single human being as a recipient, or a creator, or an enabler of the AI and the technology that is directing our existence? We cannot limit it to regulation or legislation. We cannot, certainly not limit it to the technology developers, because they don't all look like me. And thank God, probably. So what does it mean? It means that the individual citizen has an enormous responsibility.
I think so too, and I actually think there's common ground in our positions, and especially regarding what you've just said there. Inspiring private feelings of responsibility can hopefully be done, in my opinion, by setting rules that make sense to everyone involved. The 10 Commandments are so well held in such a high regard, or can be found in different cultures not related to Judeo-Christian values, just because they make sense to everyone. Don't kill if you want to live in a society is instantly recognizable and understandable. And I think we need to discuss whether we can set ethical standards that everybody agrees on, so that we then can implement these. And we can implement these by the thing you already mentioned, I believe, these committees, these possibilities for private citizens and especially societies, groups of people living in these societies, to have an impact on regulation by letting private standardized or standard setting organizations work standards out for AI. So the AI Act proposes something, without diving into too much detail. There is a possibility for the European Commission to allow private standard setting agencies or bodies or corporations, whatever it is, to set ethical standards, and if AI developers adhere to these standards, the AI systems they create are considered to be in compliance with the regulation. So what the Commission basically does is pushes the responsibility of itself away and says, I'm not responsible for everything that is happening. We've set these ground rules, but if you work out ethical standards and they are fine, well, they have to be approved by the Commission, okay, granted, but if they are, the implementation of these standards into your system is enough so that we don't ask any further question and we consider you to be in compliance with our systems. And I think this could probably be the way to encompass the individual responsibilities and the diversities of societies into regulation.
I love it, and I will not conclude because we forbid ourselves from concluding on this. But I would like to kind of raise some of the other discussion we've had, which is ideas that we could implement, concrete ideas that we could implement. So those subcommittees should, of course, reflect the voices that are not always heard, but also the voices that we don't want to hear, because that will force us to be aware of the context in which we're operating. That's one. Second, on the transparency and the agency of oversight, which is super important. We should be very explicit in the legislation and regulation on the diversity factor of the code and algorithm built, but the data set built. So that you know, as a human being, when you're being approved for a loan or rejected for a university or accepted for a reservation to a restaurant or whatever AI pervasively enters our existence, you understand the confidence level you should have in the representation of that response to you. That could mean that the code assessment could be done based on 98% of this code was written by a white male around the age of 34. How do you feel about taking the risk to this decision being the right decision for you? That's a consideration. Doesn't mean it's a good thing or a bad thing. It just means that the factor in which you're entering the decision is at least transparent and clear to you. Another very important thing we can all demand from legislation, from our government, and from the companies that we work with is clarity of language. When you make it complicated, you make it difficult to understand, it's a part of a way to make it impossible for people to challenge, argue, iterate, and improve. The more difficult is something to read, the more you know you should read it attentively. And that's something we should all strive to do in legislation and as individuals. When something needs to be documented, whether it's our code, whether it's our rules, whether it's our principles, let's make sure it's understandable and that it's validated in words that make sense to us. That will help us to actually decipher what's behind the amazing innovation, the amazing leaps that we're making in AI, and how this is meant to augment us as humans. On a personal note, I absolutely love preparing for this video. I have learned a lot, and I think this is, in my opinion, the beginning of a very important conversation for all of you, which is what could the 10 commandments of AI actually look like? And why should there be a much more universal view, not westernized, not European, but universal, on the impact not just of AI, but all technology innovation into our existence? And how does it lift us to the next level of awareness in our society? On my behalf, thank you very much, Philipp. It's been a privilege. I'm happy to give you the closing word.
Oh, that comes as a surprise. I think I don't want to add anything in regards to what you just talked about. I think they stand on their own, these words. Thank you too. What I wanted to share with all of you, that was something we discussed, are possible organizations you can look to for more information if this is something that interests you. So there, first of all, the University of Helsinki has a great online course regarding ethics on AI that you can partake in. You can do it anytime you want, and it has important information for you if you want to. Algorithm Watch is a German-based entity that is collecting all ethic guidelines proposed by either private companies or state mandates or so on and so forth, and they gathered 167 ethical guidelines focusing on AI there, so you can take these as a starting point to form your own opinions. Obviously there's a lot of material online. We've shared some of each other courses from universities or books that you can read probably due to your university. And the possibilities it provides, and there is a lot out there that you can use to further build your knowledge, and I believe that this is something that you could start with if you want to think more about these ethical questions that we barely scraped today. Thank you, Galith. Thank you for the organization of the event. Thank you all for listening.